Pride is one of those interesting words in the English language that we use to actually describe a lot of different emotions. It can be something that's actually kind of hard to reckon with some of the things we see in the Bible that talk about pride, because the Bible seems to talk about it in a very specific type of way. So what are we talking about when we actually say pride? Well, typically when we're looking at the Bible, we're really talking about a sense of pride, having an attitude of pride. And this is something that fortunately we do have a lot of people who have studied these types of things, at least psychologically, in our own time. You know, there are a lot of psychologists that basically break pride into two different categories. They look at it as being on the one end authentic pride, or on the other end as hubristic pride. So what that actually means is an authentic pride is maybe a little bit more typical what you think of when you think of a proud person. Maybe not necessarily all the narcissistic personality traits, but somebody who's very extroverted and somebody who's very has very high self-esteem and some of those kinds of traits. While as somebody who has a hubristic pride is a little bit more of, well, narcissistic. It's somebody who may or may not be extroverted. It's somebody who maybe is very shame controlled. They're very concerned about the idea of, you know, other people looking down upon them. What's interesting when we start breaking apart these different attitudes of pride is that every single person who has a pride issue doesn't necessarily fit the archetype of the loud, boisterous, proud individual. You know, we always want to think of somebody who's proud as being somebody like a Disney villain, somebody like a Dayton or something like that, who is, you know, just very out there with how great they think they are. But the reality is that pride can take on many different forms. Yes, there are certain individuals who are very, very, very loud. There are many individuals who do like for the entire world to know exactly how great and how awesome they are. And for these individuals, I think most of us can point at them and say, hey, that's a problem. You shouldn't act like that. But you know, there's also this form of what we would call quiet pride. You know, maybe a form of pride in an individual who isn't always loud and showing everybody how great they are, but yet they have the exact same problem admitting that maybe they're part of the problem. They have the exact same problem admitting that maybe they made a mistake. And, you know, in a way, their sense of quiet or introvertness is a way of kind of masking the fact that they have this issue with their own pride and self-confidence. So pride can take on many different forms, and it's not any better or any worse when it takes on one form rather than the other. It's something that regardless can actually lead us into a place where we actually start sinning. And why is that? Well, that's something that you're going to discuss here in your small groups here in a second, but I think what it all boils down to is, does our pride cause us to start elevating ourselves over other individuals? And if so, why exactly do we think that that's okay? Okay, so we all understand that pride and having this sense of arrogance is a bad thing. That's something that you don't really need any kind of sermon or a Bible study or anything in order to get over. But why is it bad? I mean, really ask yourself that question. If it's something that's wrong, I mean, why is it that we have a big problem, other than the fact that it's just really annoying? Well, it can't be sinful simply because it's annoying, so what's actually the issue? Well, one of the things you guys are going to read here in the next section is that when we have this sense of pride, what we're actually doing, so more often than not, is we're taking ourselves and actually placing ourselves above our peers. We're actually looking around at other individuals that God has placed on this earth and put in our lives and saying, there's this one aspect of myself which I revere above everybody else. Now, one of the things that we just got done reading when it comes to pride is that there is having a sense of, you know, self-pride and maybe the fact that I had a thing to deal with and I was able to endure it and all that. But even embedded in that is this sense that I'm not proud because I think I'm better than somebody else. It's because I had something that I had to go through or that I need to accomplish, and with the grace of God, I was able to do it. So even there, I'm still placing the attention really on what God is doing through me in this instance. The issue is when that God element is not there, when all of a sudden I'm looking at something and saying, look at what I did, look at what I accomplished. Rest assured, this can even happen in Christian circumstances as well. When I was doing youth ministry, that particular segment of church work, of church missions and ministry, can be highly competitive between individuals who are leading different groups. And there is a strong temptation to start looking at your organization or your group when it starts, gaining in popularity or people who are attending, and to start saying, look at what I created instead of look at what God brought to me. Do you hear the difference in those two? It's the difference between acknowledging that God is the one from whom all good things are flowing versus saying, look at what I was able to do of my own will. Look at what I'm able to do that other people aren't doing. And buried in that, can you hear it? There's a little sense of, it's almost like maybe I'm taking a little bit of the role of God. That right there is why pride becomes so detestable throughout the Bible, why we see God, completely changing the face of different situations simply based on the pride of a people or an individual. This is one of the reasons why we see so much spoken about in the Bible when it comes to having a sense of pride. So here in your small groups, I want you to read a little bit about this, and what you'll see in there, pay close attention. You'll see how individuals start placing themselves, instead of side by side with their peers or maybe even below their peers, they start placing themselves above their peers. And in doing that, they start taking on the mantle of some kind of honor and glory that maybe is not entirely deserved. One of the reasons why we want to be so certain that we avoid this sense of pride is because it actually does rob us of some of the blessings that we have to experience through a life dedicated to Jesus Christ. You can actually see this in the story of Gideon, and you can go read it if you want. It's in Judges chapter 7. It's a good story, but I won't press it on you. In this story, what you end up seeing is God working through Gideon, who has this army that's already significantly undersized compared to their adversary. And yet God looks at this undersized army and says, nope, Gideon, this army's too big. You need to cut the numbers down. And so he cuts the numbers down. But then even after he cuts the numbers down, God says, nope, you still have too many people. I need you to cut down even further. And so he ends up basically going after this enemy that has hundreds of thousands of soldiers with a meager force of 300 individuals. And these are not like the 300 Spartans either. I mean, these are basically people who are just conscripts out of, an unhappy populace of Jews that were being oppressed by the other native peoples in the area. So God actually explicitly told Gideon that I want you to have this smaller force because I don't want Israel to be able to say that we achieved this of our own strength. You can see God wants Israel, all of Israel, to be able to see that He is the one from whom all blessings truly do flow. If we sit here and we go into a situation with this sense of pride, then we can actually mask ourselves and blind ourselves to the fact that God is blessing us each and every single day. One of the things that you guys are going to read in your small groups is a story of Jesus who is sitting at basically a dinner party, and he observes some of the guests. And in doing this, he kind of tells this parable of, people sitting at the foot of the table versus the head of the table. And this is something many of you are probably aware of. And there's an easy point in here, and then there's a profound point in here. So take a moment and read through this story and see if you can identify the very simple, very easy point that we always think of when we think of humility, and then the part that's maybe a little bit more challenging to actually put into practice. Whenever we talk about things like pride, arrogance, and humility, I think there's this tendency to look at humility as essentially simple manners, as letting other people in front of you when you're waiting in line for something, as holding the door open for somebody else, as saving that last piece of pie for another individual who's at the table. But humility is about so much more than that, especially when we look at scriptural humility. It's not about going to individuals who are easy to love and saying, you know what, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to let you go first. It's about going to individuals who may seem like they don't deserve it. It's about going to individuals who may seem like they're rejected. It's about going to individuals whom the world says there's no reason to love them and saying, I'm going to love them regardless. And the reason why I'm going to love them regardless is because I am just as much of a sinner, if not more, than them. That's what true humility means. When you look at the life of the apostles and you look at the life of Christ, that is exactly what they lived out, is this life that basically said, I'm going to look at every individual in the room and say that I am last. Not because of the promise of some kind of reward in heaven and not because it's just proper manners, but because I truly value that person, not just as an individual, but as a creation of God. Really what it all comes down to is understanding this, that no one of us is better than the other. It doesn't matter what we have accomplished or what we've done. It doesn't matter what we've learned or what we've achieved. It doesn't matter what accolades the rest of the world has placed upon us. At the end of the day, every single one of us is a sinner. As the popular phrase goes, there but for the grace of God go I. This is what it means to be a Christian, to not just have a set of pretty values that we follow and to not just simply go and do something one day a week when we go to church, wherever that may be, in whatever format that may take on, but to truly look at the rest of creation, a creation that is hurting for a God that loves them immensely, and to look at them and say, I value them even above myself. So the million-dollar question is this: if we are truly loving these individuals, what are we doing about it? I hope you're able to get something out of this lesson today. Until we can meet again, God bless.